how do we teach every single child how to read? What I'm going to do with you today is just kind of share with you some simple techniques that you can add to what you're already doing, or if you're new to this work, you can begin trying. Just little changes or little nuances that are just going to make what we do with our students even more powerful. So in order to teach a child to read, we kind of have to help them use a whole bunch of different parts of their brain to read words and to make meaning. And that is why reading is so hard. It is not a natural thing. It is human design. The brain was wired for speech and language, talking, listening. So it's really hard to get a child to learn how to read. But in order to read a word, there's kind of three parts of the brain that we have to use. So there's three things they have to do. So because I said there's no part in the brain that reads, the brain also doesn't see whole words. Most people don't know that either, okay? The brain only sees individual letters or patterns. There's a part of the brain that sees patterns, okay? So the way that we actually read when we're first learning how to read is we see a letter, okay? And then we have to attach a sound to it. So, right? And then we go, and then we have to put those sounds together. Go count, right? And then we have to attach mean. And you have to do all three. Because if I don't know what the word means, right, it's not going to stick for me. And I have to do that as a young reader a number of times, right? And then eventually I get really fast at it. So I'm not thinking about my brain doing that. I just go, cat, right? But first, and those of you that work with our younger readers, right, they're going, dog. So, that's actually what they do. Or tap. They'll flip them around, and that's very normal for our young ones, right? Because they haven't had enough practice with the right? So when we're working with this foundational element of reading, okay, there's a couple of things that we can do. The first thing is just kind of what I really pointed out. We have to have them look at each letter and say a sound, right? So if I'm working with a young student, I'm going to point to the first letter in the word, and we say, what's the sound? Don't ask what the name is. Ask what is the sound, because that's what they're doing when they're reading. That little change is important, okay? So ask them, and they don't know it, say the sound. Say that with me, right? Okay? So we say the sound, and then we go, now what's the next sound? And point to it, or have them point to it. The more physical you can make them and get them touching things, the better, okay? So what's the sound? Yeah. Right? Then, if they're struggling with the whole word, just put two sounds together. And then add the third sound. Right? What's the sound? And then have them practice going, count. Okay? And then you always, especially for our children that are speaking multiple languages, and we have many of them in the desert, right? Make sure they know what a cat is. It matters, right? Because we don't want to just teach kids to read letter sounds. We want meaning, right? So, talk about this cat. It's an animal. It's furry. Have you ever seen a cat, right? So make sure they have connected meaning. If they can't read 3 letters, go down to 2. Just take a letter off. Okay? Because 3 is hard. So with most of our young learners, we start with 2 letters, and, as, right? Those types of things. Then we add the 3rd letter. And then we add a 4th letter. So over time, that's how we kind of build that in them. That's called blending, just so you know. That's called blending words. So what if somebody gives you a bunch of words to practice? Like a list of words, flashcards, right? So a lot of times, a practice that occurs in our classrooms is something that we call high frequency words. So these are just common words that we see a lot in books, right? And so they want the kids to practice reading, okay? So we can do that. We can just do a flashcard or just read word lists. But I want to show you a couple of techniques to tweak a little that might make them stickier, that helps the brain remember, okay? So I use a very simple routine. And the reason I use this routine is that the more we use the different senses in our body, the more the brain remembers. So if we can engage the eye, the ear, the hands, or movement of some kind, and then we say it. So if we use the different senses in our body, it helps the brain remember, okay? So that's my tip for you. What I do then is I just use a routine that does that, okay? So let me just show it to you. So I give them the word, okay? The word is away. Say the word with me, away, okay? I will be away next week for a vacation. So you always want to give meaning, okay? Always give meaning, okay? Then we're gonna say it, and you can tap like down the arm. Sorry, mice. You can go down the arm. You can tap on the table, right? They can clap. Want puppets, they can use those. Have you ever seen those little round things with puppet things? Okay, well, you can do lots of things, but you want to make it so they're touching me. And then we're going to spell the word 3 times out loud. So everybody do it with me. A-W-A-Y. A-W-A-Y. We can do this. A-W-A-Y. And then if you have paper or a whiteboard or anything available to you, even better than if they could write A-W-A-Y 3 times. That after writing it, saying it, touching it, having meaning, and writing is going to help that word be stickier. So take all the words that you're working on and put them on little strips of paper, right, and lay them out. And then kind of play a game, like touch, or if you have a pointer of some kind or whatever, but just have them find the words. So after you've taught it, they've written it, they've said it, they've written it, touch the word, find the word, and then they have to say it. Again, so that movement or that interaction is really, really helpful. You can also have them go find it in a book that you're reading. So high frequency words are called that because they show up in books all the time. Okay? So again, finding those words in books. So any book that's available to you, have them go on a word hunt. They love doing that, okay? And you oh, there it is, right there in the sentence, excellent, right? So then it makes those words become real to them. Because it's a list of words or flashcards with words, they're like, yeah, what is this? Why am I doing this? So you have to connect them to it, okay? And then if you want to, then you can take those words and like make word shapes, like see that picture where you put the little cards or strips of paper in different shapes, and then they have to read through the game. And then you can move them around, now read through the game again. It just makes it feel fun. They feel like they're playing a game, but they're still getting the same type of practice. They may give you something called a decodable book. So a decodable book is a book that has very controlled words. So they would have a little book that just practices on that one skill. So I copied one, but basically you would recognize the code book is a pretty simple looking, right? And they usually have a lot of words that are similar, have a similar sound. So this one is about the I, letter I. So there's the word bit, big, rib, Rick, Liz, Tim, right, him. All of those words have that same letter. They're pretty simple, okay? And they're that way for a reason, okay? Because these books are to get the kids to practice just reading the words off the page. And then we also want to get them excited to read it. They want to be interested in the book. If they're not interested, they're not going to pay attention. Okay? And then we want to ask them questions and then talk about it. It's really just about the conversation. But with the decodable book, look at it, flip through the pages, let them get curious about it, right? Get them to get excited to read. What do you think might happen? Oh, what do you see? Oh, we can find out what's going to happen in this book, right? So the more you can get them excited and ready to read the book, the more likely that they will engage with it and really want to read it, and then more likely that they'll understand it, right? But when we read with a student, we want to keep our voices quiet and keep their voices as the most important. So we might want to be very softly alongside them, making them the star. It's all about them being the star and them being the reader. You want to help them, but don't let them guess. Don't let them move on with it incorrect. Redirect. Let's go back to the sounds in the word, and let's put those sounds together. Okay? So the tip I want to share with you is just point to the vowel. Listen to this. Have them identify the vowel or vowels, because there's usually more than one letter. What sound does E make? That's what you need to get them to pay attention to. That's what they're messing up. That's what they don't know. Okay? And if you have the cards or whatever, just tell them, E makes E if you know. Okay? And that's okay if you don't. Okay? And then put it together. So it's E, T. It's the same, but we have a lot more complicated vowels. Okay? So if they start struggling with the word, again, you want to slow down, find the part that's interesting, right? Or AR makes a sound, right? So our goal with decoding words is to get students to have a strategy to say, here's what I do if I don't know a word. So we want to keep pointing them back to the parts in the word. What do you see in there that you recognize? So even if you don't feel comfortable with it, and that's okay, say, what do you see in the word? What do you think the vowel sound is? Do you see any things at the end like ing that you know a lot? Just get them to pay attention to what's in the word and to try to look for patterns, because the brain likes patterns. But if they already know how to read the words, ignore everything I just said. Okay? Like, we don't need to do that if they already know how to read the words, right? So you might be giving students that are great readers, right? And they're fine with reading all the words. Let them read. Don't slow down. The only time you would use that is if they encounter a word they don't know. So they might have like one or two words they don't know. Slow them down. Okay, let's figure out what this means, what this word is, and then go on. Because once you learn phonics, it's easy. It's over with. We don't keep doing it, right? It's just about to teach them what it is. Okay, so comprehension is a whole different vibe. So just so you know, there are different types of books that we read, okay? So one is those decodable books that I talked about, and those are really to teach them how to read the words, and then all the other books that we have. But it is important that we know there are some that are real, like real stories, or they teach us or inform us, and there's some that are fiction or not real, made up, okay? And we actually read them differently. Most people don't know that, but you actually do read them differently. And so it's important that we help our kids know that as well. So when we read a fiction story, or we call it narrative in K-12 world, right? We read for some very specific things. And we know this as good readers. We know we're supposed to read for characters. We know we're reading about where does this story take place. We know that there's some type of problem or some type of events that we're reading for, right? And usually there's like some type of message or lesson or something that we get from it. Some enjoyment, right? So when we're reading, we're actually paying attention to those details. So if it's a fiction story or a narrative, here's a question that you can use before reading or while you're reading. Like in the middle of the book, you can stop and ask, what do you think is going to happen next? Our goal is to get the kids into thinking about what the story means, right? You want to get them into always thinking about it, processing, talking about it. And they don't have to be right, but it's more about what do you think is going to happen, okay? And then at the end, well, what actually happened? Just kind of passing them into it. But the questions are different if it's informational text, right? So it matters because you read differently for it. So it's more about what do you think you'll learn, not what will happen, because fiction is about events and things happening. Information is about what we learn. So you want to ask them, what will you learn in this text? Okay? Or what did you learn? Always getting them to talk about that. And then we can also ask them to think about, well, what do they already know? Like, what do you know about desert animals? Right? That would help you understand this. Okay? And then, an inference is where they have to, figure it out. Like, it doesn't say it in the book, but they have to, there's clues. Okay? So sometimes, well, what clues do we have? How could we figure that out? Okay? So it's really about getting them to think about the text, right? Asking them questions. You don't have to use all these questions, just a couple each time you read. Stop every page or two, couple pages, right? You don't have to overkill this, right? You don't have to stop at every paragraph or every line. You can decide that. But at least every couple pages. Depends on how long the book is. For those of you that are working with older students, those books are long. Right? So just try to find a good place when you're like, okay, that was a lot of information. So anytime I'm like, oh, that was a lot, I stop. And I ask them to stop and think of action. Yeah, the ants are working, the grasshopper's laying around. Anybody notice that it's a play? There's scenes, there's dialogue, there's parts, there's different animals are talking. I just ask a couple of questions per page. What did we learn? What questions do you have, right? You can also ask this question, what do you visualize? What are you seeing in your head when you read this? If you were watching this as a movie, what do you see? So I hope that I gave you a couple little tricks that you can try tomorrow, and you have some resources to do that. Reading is complicated, and it takes our whole community to make sure that all of our students learn how to read.